You know, some stories, we see them in the headlines every single day. But others, they're hidden, written much, much deeper. Today, we're going to uncover a story that you can't find in a history book because it's written in our very own DNA. So, let me ask you this. What if the long, incredibly complicated story between two peoples could be understood through a completely different lens? Not politics, not religion, but something like, well, pure genetics. That's exactly what we're going to dive into today. We're exploring the powerful and, frankly, pretty surprising genetic connection between modern Jewish and Palestinian populations. We're going to peel back all those layers of recent history to find a much, much older story. All right, so where does this story even begin? Well, we have to go back, way back, thousands of years ago to the ancient land of Canaan. As you're about to see, the scientific evidence points to this remarkable shared origin, an echo from the Bronze Age that we can still hear loud and clear today. And look, we're not just talking about some vague similarity here. The language that scientists use is really telling. I mean, they use terms like blood brothers or cousins. In the world of genetics, you just don't throw words like that around lightly. They signify a really profound and direct shared ancestry. Okay, so where does this connection actually come from? The key is this term right here, Levantine ancestry. Basically, it refers to a common genetic pool from the folks who lived in the Levant thousands of years ago, specifically the Bronze Age Canaanites. You can think of it as the genetic bedrock of this whole story. And just how strong is this link we're talking about? We'll get this. Genetic research shows that modern Palestinians get over 80% of their ancestry from those Bronze Age Levantine populations. Wow. That is an incredibly direct line back to the ancient people of that land. And this chart here, it really paints a picture. When you compare modern groups to that ancient Levantine genetic profile, you see something pretty striking. Modern Palestinians show a really high degree of genetic closeness. And who's right there with them? Mizrahi Jews. That's Jews whose ancestors stayed in the Middle East. It's powerful proof that both groups are drawing heavily from that exact same ancient well, genetically speaking. Okay, so if they share this deep, deep origin, you've got to be asking, how did that connection possibly survive through millennia of history? Well, the answer is in the historical events that shaped this shared gene pool. This timeline gives us the quick and dirty version. We start with the Canaanites back in the Bronze Age. Then, fast forward, a really pivotal moment comes in the 7th century with the Islamic conquest. And later, during the Ottoman era, you see a society where Muslims, Christians, and Jews were all living side by side. And this brings us to a really key piece of the puzzle. Researchers theorize that a huge chunk of modern Palestinians are actually descended from the local populations who were already there, including local Jews and Christians who, over centuries, converted to Islam. So, think about what that means. This wasn't a population replacement, it was a cultural and religious transformation of the very same people who had lived there for generations. Right. So that obviously begs the next question, doesn't it? If the starting point is so similar, why are the modern groups we see today so distinct? This is where we start to see two very different paths emerge from that single origin. The answer lies in something called admixture, which is just a fancy word geneticists use for the mixing of different ancestral populations. As you can see here, Palestinian ancestry is overwhelmingly from those ancient Levantine groups. But the ancestry of Ashkenazi Jews, that is, Jews whose ancestors lived in Europe, it's a mix. It has that same Levantine foundation for sure, but it's blended with a pretty significant European component from all those centuries spent in the diaspora.
This chart breaks it down for us. For Ashkenazi Jews, it's roughly half and half. A little over half of their ancestry traces back to the Levant, while the rest is connected to European populations. And that mixing is the main reason for the genetic distance we saw in the earlier bar chart. It's a story of both where you come from and where you've been.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, it's that the major distinctions we see today between these groups are the result of their different historical journeys. They're rooted in culture, in religion, and in migration, not in having fundamentally separate biological beginnings. And to really get a handle on that divergence, we have to look at the historical forces that shaped the Jewish diaspora, and much, much later, the movement to establish a national homeland. You know, the scattering of the Jewish people from the Levant, it wasn't just one thing that happened. It was driven by these huge historical pushes, from expulsions by the Roman Empire to centuries of persecution in Europe, all the way up to the absolute horror of the Holocaust. These events are what scattered Jewish communities all across the globe. Now, the movement to establish the State of Israel grew from two main roots, according to historical sources. First, that enduring religious and ancestral connection to the land. And second, after everything that happened, the powerful belief that a secure, sovereign homeland was absolutely essential for Jewish survival. Okay, let's pull all these threads together. What does this deep dive into genetics and history ultimately tell us? It reveals a connection that is far, far deeper than the modern conflict might ever suggest. So at the end of the day, here's the crucial takeaway. It's like we have two parts of the same story. Genetics reveals this single shared origin, a story of biological cousins, really, and history tells the complex tale of how those cousins walked two very different paths, creating distinct cultures, religions, and identities. And that just leaves us with one final big question to think about. What does it mean when history, culture, and politics divide people who, according to the story written in their DNA, share the same biological beginning? It's a powerful question to consider, and that's where we'll leave it for today. Thanks for joining me.